So,
like there's
yes, Aldo.
sorry, if you'll definitely cover that, but the actual EFT setup, I'll just pay close attention.
Yeah.
But that's the actual setup of EFT sort of throws me around sometimes.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one. It can definitely be a bit tricky, I'll tell you, especially in the earlier versions, because what we've done in version 6.3 and onwards, which I'll show you guys now, is show you the record layout in this EFT bank setup. And that helps a great deal. But before, it really was tricky to set up some of the bank formats, because you have to know, obviously, which field value to put in which field and how that field is then exported, and then look at the EFT file and see what the offset of that field is, and then try and determine where that value should be entered. And that now is a lot easier in the 6.3, that's 2016 and later versions. And I'll show you guys now. Okay, great. So let's get straight into that, actually, because that is the crux of it. Once you set up your EFTXpress bank, then the rest is just purely doing your vendor payment information under the miscellaneous codes, and that's pretty straightforward, but it's getting that format set up correctly that is the crux of it. And that we do under the CB setup EFTXpress banks. Now under that setup EFTXpress banks, I'm just going to select the very first one here. Okay, here we go. So under setup EFTXpress banks, this is where you're going to be selecting your particular bank format that you are going to be creating the EFT file for. And this is where you'd set up the fields that need to be exported to that particular EFT file. Now, the first thing you would select is your bank code in Cashbook that you are going to be setting up the EFT for. And then in the bank format field, you will then use the finder, and you will off your bank format list, select your particular bank format that you're going to be setting your EFT up for. And as I said, this zoom button here next to the bank format is now a new feature in version 2016, which is 6.3a and later versions. And you can then click on that zoom button, and that will give you the record layout of that particular format. Now this is going to help you a great deal, because this can guide you. It will show you exactly what would be in the header.
Mike?
Yes?
Could you please make the screen bigger?
Like that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this will tell us exactly, you're welcome, what is expected in the header of the EFT record, what is expected in the detail, and then what is expected in the trailer of the EFT record. And of course, this information is the information that we receive from the bank when we develop this EFT format. They give us the record layout, and we will then design our EFT file according to that record layout. And what we're looking at here is that exact record layout. So you can see in this particular First National Bank Business Internet Solutions format, it starts the header with our own description field. Then we've got a filler, and then we've got an end of record, and then again our own description, a filler, and then a process date, and then a filler. So I can immediately tell from this that the important field there would be the process date field. And that process date field is the actual field which is included in the EFT file and which is picked up by the bank, and they will process the EFT run on that date. So if you want to submit your EFT file to the bank today, but you only want them to process that EFT payment run on the 7th of April, as an example, then your process date that you set would be the 7th of April, and it will export it to that EFT file. Now, where do we set up that process date? Let's quickly go here to our batch entry, because I'd just like to show you while we're at that point where that process date is. Now, when you've got EFT installed, when you create a new Cashbook batch, you will be able to, in the batch control, set that batch as an EFT batch. So you can see here you've got an additional batch type. In addition to your normal and transfer, you also have an EFT batch type. And if you select EFT there you can then set your process date. Now it will default to the batch date, but you can obviously overwrite it. So as I said, if you now want to do it for a future date, you can then enter the EFT process date there. If you leave that process date and you've set up a process date and you create a new batch and the batch date is later than that EFT process date, then it will use the batch date rather than the EFT process date. So it has to be a future date to your batch date to be exported to that EFT file, and that indicates to the bank exactly when you want that EFT process run to take place. Okay, so that's the process date we're referring to in this header record here of this particular bank format. Now if we look at the detail record, it will now tell you exactly which field. And although this is where it becomes easier, because before it was tricky to, if you don't have the actual bank format in front of you and looking at the offsets and of course the field values, etc., that should be in those particular field offsets in the record, then it would be difficult for you to determine exactly which field is going to be export to which offset in the file. So that makes it a hell of a lot easier. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and also for the amount of characters, if it's, you know, if it doesn't match, then the file doesn't import.
Correct. Exactly, because the file has to be in that exact format that the bank expects. Now the bank's upload obviously validates that file to ensure that the file is in that exact format. And only if it is will it then upload. Okay. So it's important to know about the zoom button because that will guide you. And you can see in our detail we've got our own description that we can set up. Then we've got a bank branch code, a CB bank account number. That is your bank account of your actual bank account in Cashbook. A sequence number, miscellaneous branch code, miscellaneous account number, miscellaneous account type, CB batch entry amount. So now you can see exactly, and you can actually go to the EFT file and you can count the offsets and see exactly which field in your Cashbook and your miscellaneous code and your EFT bank setup will be exported to that particular offset in the file. And then of course if we look at the trailer of this file, you can see it will show us exactly what the trailer of the file is as well. Now once we've looked at that particular record layout, we can now proceed and we can then set up the fields that need to be exported to that EFT file for that particular format. Now the export path here that you'll be entering here is the path to which you want to generate that EFT file that you are going to be uploading to the bank. So there you can set exactly where the file location is that file should be generated to when you post the Cashbook EFT batch. The account number here is your actual bank account number for this bank code. And that bank account number you can also set up in your CB setup bank accounts for the particular bank code. And then it will retrieve it to this account number field for you. Then your branch code field, you can see by this asterisk here that it's a compulsory field for this particular bank format, and that is your branch code of your actual bank account. Your file extension, now you can set your file extension. That is the extension that is going to be used when that EFT file is generated. And for the different bank formats, they will expect different file extensions. So that's where you can enter that file extension. The seed number field you can see here is grayed out, it's disabled, because this particular bank format, the FMB format, does not require a seed number, and that's why it's been disabled. In your NetBank format, you do require a seed number, and then that field will be enabled so you can actually enter that seed number. Then we have a tick box here that says use optional fields. Now if you tick the use optional fields, there will be additional fields that you can see here in your bank export fields that you can then use to export to that EFT file. So if your format allows you those optional fields, you can then toggle on the optional fields and you can enter those field values there, which will then export to your EFT file as well. And then importantly, we also allow you to build your description that is going to appear on your bank statement when that EFT payment is processed. And then you can also build the description that is going to appear on the beneficiary's bank statement when that payment is processed to the beneficiary. Now, this is obviously very important to facilitate the reconciliation process when you reconcile your bank statements so that you know exactly which beneficiary was paid and on the beneficiary side who paid them via that EFT. Let's look at this description that we can build. Now, the first field allows you to set the number of segments that you want to include in your description that is going to go to the My Statement description, which is my bank statement. So for our purposes, we've selected the maximum, which is 3 segments. And in your segments then, you can select the following field to decide which field will make up your description on your particular bank statement. And you can see there, we've got quite a number of fields that you can use. The batch entry reference, the batch entry description, the miscellaneous code, the miscellaneous name, or the batch ID or the batch ID, and then entry number. And then of course, you can also, those optional fields that we were referring to, where you can switch on the tick box, you can then export that optional fields that you have now set up to your description on your bank statement as well. Now, following your first segment, you can then set up a separator before the next segment of the description starts. And you can see there, we've given you the space, the asterisk, the hyphen, / backslash, none, which means there is no separator. It will just run into the second segment without any character in between. And then you can select also own separator. And of course, if you select your own separator and you tab off that field, you can then enter whichever character you want to, because it will then create the own field for you where you can set that own separator. Then you get to your segment 2. Once again, from your list of fields, you can then select what segment 2 should be. Your separator again, we've chosen our own here for our separator between segment 2 and 3, which is the hyphen, and then your segment 3. And exactly the same way, you would then build your description that goes to the beneficiary statement account as well. Now, you can set this up for the bank on this level, and when we go to the miscellaneous code, you will see that you can also set it up per miscellaneous code, which means you can set up a global setting here. And then in the miscellaneous code, you can just select to use this descriptions that you've set here. Or if you have different descriptions that you want to build and use for your various beneficiaries, then you can actually set that up individually for each particular beneficiary in the miscellaneous code. So let's go to the miscellaneous code then and see how we set up the miscellaneous code. This is the bank information that is set, that is the required fields that should be exported to that EFT file. So once you've completed this, you can then close your EFT bank setup and you can now proceed to your miscellaneous code setup. And in your miscellaneous code setup, if you've got EFTXpress activated, you will see there is an additional tab, EFT, where you can then set up the beneficiary payment information. Now, we've also included in 6.3 and later versions the ability for you to set up for one bank code in Cashbook, multiple beneficiary payment information for one beneficiary. So you can see that is exactly what we've done here. For bank code CCB, for beneficiary code 1200, we've set up 2 beneficiary payment banks, Netbank and ABSA. So you can now set up multiple banks per beneficiary per bank code. Now the information you'll be entering here would be the information of the beneficiary that you will be paying when that EFT payment is processed. We've got the bank name, the account number. In this field, that is the default field. In other words, when this EFT payment is generated for this particular miscellaneous code, which payment information should it use as a default? And whichever one you set as the default, yes,
Mike?
yes.
What are we entering under the bank name?
You would enter the bank name of the person you're paying, the name of the bank of the person you're paying. So it's the beneficiary's bank name. Okay, and then the beneficiary's account number, and then of course the beneficiary's branch number as well. Because in that EFT file, for every payment that you're processing, the bank obviously needs to know to which bank that payment should be processed, what the account number is, and what the branch number of that account number is, in order for that payment to be paid through to that particular beneficiary's bank account. Okay. Then we've got a bank ID field as well, an account type. So in the account type, you'll select if it's a current, savings, transmission, bond, or sub-share account. And this will all depend on the particular format. So some formats won't even use the bank ID. We'll only use the branch, account number, and bank name. But others will have a bank ID that is a required field as well. So it depends on which format you're dealing with. And then we have a SWIFT code. The SWIFT code is usually used for international payments, where you have a SWIFT code that you've got to enter for the beneficiary. And then at the end of your beneficiary payment information, you can now select that description that has to go to your beneficiary's bank statement account. And you can see here your beneficiary segments, and you can select to use the bank defaults. If you select to use the bank defaults, it will use that description that we've built in the bank setup, where we've set up the EFTXpress bank details, which I've been doing. However, if you want to set up a different description for this particular miscellaneous code and not use the description you've built in the bank setup, then you can say, yeah, how many segments once again, and then go through the same process of setting up that beneficiary's description that is going to appear on their bank statement specifically for this beneficiary. So if this beneficiary only wants one segment, then you could select one segment and set that up only for this beneficiary. Okay, so you can either default to what was set up in bank setup, or you can set your own descriptions again on the miscellaneous code for that particular beneficiary. Now the other thing that's important to remember here is the miscellaneous code here must correspond to your accounts payable vendor code if you are going to be retrieving EFT batches from accounts payable into Cashbook and generating EFT files from those retrieved accounts payable EFT batches. The way it will work is, if that vendor code comes through and you set the batch as an EFT batch, it will look for the equivalent miscellaneous code in Cashbook, and it will pick up the EFT payment information for that beneficiary from the EFT tab of that same miscellaneous code that corresponds to the vendor code. Okay. And in that vein, we also allow you in your CB setup options, you can set up...
Mike, before you proceed, I've got a question on the miscellaneous codes on the bank ID. Where do we get that bank ID from?
The bank ID will be provided to you by the beneficiary. So if the beneficiary is with a bank that requires a bank ID for them to process their EFT payment, and your bank requires that bank ID to make that payment to them, the bank will then give you that ID for that particular beneficiary's bank. So in other words, some of the bank formats, and not all of them, some of the bank formats, let's use Standard Bank as an example. It will use that bank ID to identify which bank the payment is going to be made for. So let's say that bank ID 137157 is a bank ID that will be allocated to FNB accounts. So what Standard Bank will then know is if the bank ID is 137157, it will be an FNB bank account that beneficiary payment should be processed to. So it identifies the beneficiary's bank for your bank. So they can use that bank ID to know which bank the beneficiary belongs to and to which bank they must process the EFT payment to.
Okay. Would you know the banks that are currently using that column? Because I've just done a couple of EFTs and I'm not sure that that part we got it right.
It's all different. Each format will be different. So off the top of my head, unless I sat there and studied each one, I can't answer that question. You saw the list of bank formats. I would be a genius if I could.
Right, come on, you know.
Yeah, that's not.
I know you know. Not with it, please.
What you can do though, Masleen, and to find out, is that zoom button next to the bank format will show you if the bank ID is exported or not.
Okay.
Okay, and it will, so when you look at that format, remember we saw the header, and then we saw the detail, and then we saw the trailer of that record for that particular bank format. It will show you in that format, either the header, the detail, or the trailer, bank ID, and then you know that for that particular format, you will have to enter that field.
Okay.
Okay, so that's how you can determine it. Right. Then,
Mike, am I correct in saying that normally that information is provided by the client?
Correct. Correct. The client will provide it to you and say, this is my bank ID, this is my payment information. And if the client doesn't provide it to you, Aldo, it could be that your bank will provide that information to you, because it could be that the bank says to you, that particular bank ID is for FNB it's this, for Standard Bank it's this, for ABSA it's this, for Netbank it's this, so that you know if you're paying a particular beneficiary for one of those banks, you'll have a list of what bank ID applies to which bank.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Now, in our CB options, we also allow you, and this is particularly if you're going to be retrieving batches from accounts payable or accounts receivable, refund batches, because obviously that's a payment as well, and you want to set those batches as EFT batches. So if most of your accounts payable batches that you are retrieving from accounts payable, you are going to generate EFT batches for in Cashbook, then you can come into your retrieve from other systems, and under your APAR options, you can then set your EFT batch option here. You can toggle that EFT batch tick box on, which means that every batch that is retrieved from accounts payable will automatically be flagged an EFT batch in Cashbook. Now, that saves the user from having to go into each retrieved accounts payable batch, going into the batch control, and to select the batch type as EFT. So if most of the batches are EFT batches, toggle that on, and they can just go and toggle off the exceptions which are not EFT batches. If most of them are not EFT batches and the exception is an EFT batch, then leave that off, and they would just go, once they've retrieved the batch, into that retrieved batch, and they would then go into the batch control and flag it as an EFT batch. The append EFT batches, now that can be used if you are retrieving multiple batches from accounts payable. Now remember, in Cashbook, for each EFT batch that you post, it will generate an EFT file. So a separate EFT file is generated for each EFT batch posted in Cashbook. So if you wanted to post multiple EFT batches in accounts payable and then retrieve them to Cashbook, but you only want to generate one EFT file so that they only do one EFT payment process run for that particular EFT file, then you can select this append EFT batches option. And what it will do is, when it retrieves the batch from accounts payable, it will search through the Cashbook batch list, and it will check if there's any open EFT batch. In other words, any unposted batch in Cashbook that has been flagged as an EFT batch. If there is, it will then add that information to that batch, and it won't generate a new batch when the batch is retrieved. So that when you generate your EFT file, it will generate one file. Go ahead.
So it consolidates
Correct.
the EFT batches.
It consolidates it. As you retrieve, it will check if there's an open EFT batch already. If there is, it will add to that batch. Now, you can set that option, and if all your batches are posted that are flagged EFT in Cashbook, then obviously it will have to create a new EFT batch. But if you have an open EFT batch that you haven't posted yet, it will keep adding to that one, and then as soon as you post that one EFT file would be generated. And then, of course, on the AR side, you can also select for those refund batches that are retrieved to Cashbook from AR to set them automatically as EFT batches. Okay, so those are your options in options. Then we also have an audit report, and the audit report is under registers, and you can select the EFT bank audit report. And that audit report will give you a printout of that EFT tab in the Cashbook miscellaneous codes, because that is obviously very sensitive information. And the person that has access to that EFT tab has access to change the beneficiary payment information and generate an EFT payment to the bank to pay that particular information. So the control on that must be very strict. And if anybody went in there and changed that beneficiary payment information, you want an audit trail of that to know, so that if there is anything unto do where a payment has gone through to a beneficiary that it should not have gone through, you can come and check to see who made those changes to that beneficiary payment information in the EFT tab of the miscellaneous code. Now, the information that's printed in this audit report is we'll print the bank code, the miscellaneous code, in other words, which beneficiary, the user that made the change to that beneficiary payment information, the date it was changed, the time it was changed, and then all your fields in that EFT tab, it will then show you which of those fields have been changed, and it will show you what the field value was and what it was changed to, so that you always have a clear audit report as to who changed any of the beneficiary payment information in case you need to do an investigation on a payment that went through to a beneficiary payment information that it might not have been authorized to go through to. Good. And then, of course, in our administrative services security groups, we also have the EFTXpress security, where we can then grant security access to the users to the particular EFT functions. Now, you can grant it to CB batch entry, which will then obviously allow the user to flag batches as EFT batches. If they don't have that option, they won't be able to. Your setup EFTXpress banks, where you set up your EFT bank. Your edit EFT MISC details, that is your beneficiary details. Beneficiary payment information, that EFT tab on the miscellaneous code, obviously a very important one. And then we also have the approved bank details. And the approved bank details, you can do a once-off EFT payment. In other words, not set up the EFT payment information in the EFT tab, but set it up in batch entry itself. If you are going to do a once-off payment as an EFT, and you are not going to add a miscellaneous code for this particular vendor because chances are you're not going to be doing any future transactions with them, then if you do set up the information there, there is a approved bank details option there, tick box, which I'll show you when we go to batch entry. And only a user with that security right would be able to authorize that information set up there to allow that beneficiary payment to proceed if the information was set up in the batch rather than in the EFT miscellaneous code. Okay, so that's your security on the user you have as well. Then of course, in the Cashbook batch list, all you would do for your EFT batches is you would then open a Cashbook batch and you'll flag it as an EFT batch by going to your batch control and in your batch type selecting EFT. Now, in your EFT,
can you change a normal Cashbook batch to, can you amend a normal Cashbook batch? Can you change it to EFT?
Yes, that's exactly what you can do. You can change it at any point to an EFT batch.
Oh, okay, and vice versa.
And vice versa. Now, if you switch a EFT batch off to a normal batch and switch it back to an EFT batch, it will also ask, it will give you a question and say, do you want to refresh the payment information from miscellaneous code EFT tab in case that information has been updated. So if you have changed any information before you've posted the batch, you might want to do that, and then it will retrieve the new payment beneficiary information from that EFT miscellaneous code. And then of course here we can also set up our EFT payment information here. If we're going to do a once-off EFT payment to a particular beneficiary and we don't want to add that information permanently, and that's the approved yes no tick box, that user that you've assigned that security right to has got to have security rights to approve that payment. Otherwise this information cannot be used to generate to the EFT file as a beneficiary payment.
Is that authorization set up in user authorizations or in Cashbook itself?
In that user authorizations, yeah, under administrative services, security groups, EFTXpress, there we go, approved bank details. The user has to have that approved bank details right before they can then come here in the batch and flag that. Sorry, we're not in the batch there. Let's go back to the batch here quickly. Before they can toggle that on.
Okay, on that one, can we have, is that a control for all the other vendors, or it's only when you have a miscellaneous vendor?
It is only if you do not have the vendor payment information set up in the miscellaneous code and you want to process a once-off EFT payment. In other words, you don't want to retain that information.
Okay, okay, because I was...
Go on, Ms. Lee.
I was actually wondering on the controls, if you suppose you have created an EFT batch, no one is going to authorize, and then the same person who has created an EFT batch goes ahead and then makes a payment without any authorization there. Like currently our authorization that we're doing is out of the system. So in terms of segregation of duties there, I'm just wondering how that actually is solved.
That you would do under your security groups once again, yeah. You can have a batch entry, which means if you select that, they will be able to flag the batch as EFT. This is your setup to set up your EFTXpress banks. That is your edit EFT miscellaneous details. So you could have a user that is allowed to create an EFT batch, but they do not have a right to set up beneficiary payment details. In other words, they've got no access to the beneficiary details. So they could still enter the batch and process the batch, but if they don't have this edit EFT MISC details, security access, they will not be able to get to the beneficiary payment information. Similarly, if they don't have that one, they won't be able to enter it in the batch as well, because you have to tick on that approve yes no box. So for your user that is only going to be doing the processing of the EFT batch, in other words, actually entering or retrieving the physical payments, but you do not want to give them access to the beneficiary payment information, you would then only give them access to the CB batch entry. And they will not be able to get to the beneficiary payment information and set up. And then your other user that has that authority, you will give them edit EFT miscellaneous details. And they can then go and set up the beneficiary payment information. Do you understand?
Okay. No, not quite. I'm saying if the person who creates the payments, right? Mm-hmm. They create the batch, the EFT. It's also the same person who is going to upload to the bank, right? Mm-hmm. So they need someone to authorize before they actually do the upload to the bank, right? So that to prevent them from just paying whatever they want, because they can do that.
No, they can't. Oh, you mean they can't change who they pay to, but you mean they can process a payment to an existing beneficiary that should not have been processed.
Yes, that should not have been processed. Okay. Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay. Yes. So what you would have to do there, Maslin, is that EFT file is obviously generated to the location in CB Setup EFTXpress banks. You can set the location of where that file should be generated to. So through your Windows security, you must set security on that particular directory so that the user that then generates the EFT file does not have access to that file in that directory.
Okay.
That's why you would do that. And then only the person that has Windows security rights to that particular directory will have access to that file that's been generated.
Okay.
And then, of course, it's also, if you're going to be doing that, then it's also important to remember, don't give them access to the EFTXpress bank code setup, because otherwise they can just change the path.
Okay.
And that will then give you the security that you require in that scenario.
Mike, while you're on that screen...
Oh, sorry, yes?
I just want to confirm, the segments for the descriptions, am I correct in saying those segments has to match the bank format?
Correct, because...
Or has that changed in the newer versions, or is it still the same?
You can actually set up usually in the bank formats, Aldo, as a norm, you can set up your own descriptions and determine what goes to the description field. So it all depends on how long the description field is for that particular bank format. But the description field will be a certain offset in that EFT file, and it will be a certain length. What goes into that description field is up to you when you build the segments.
Okay. Do you remember a few months ago we had an issue at a client with Standard Bank?
Yes.
That we developed a new file or format for a specific Standard Bank format. Because they sent us an example of the actual bank format, and for some reason those descriptions had to match that format. Is that right?
Are you saying that the actual description was set in that format? The actual text of the description had to be what the bank... Are you talking about public beneficiaries?
Right. Say again?
Are you talking about public beneficiaries?
That was in the actual segments in the screen. That we were struggling to get it to match the Standard Bank format to be able to upload that EFT file.
Actually, with Standard Bank, I think on that segment one, there's a particular field that they look for. With the one that I recently did, I saw that on the forum. There's a particular, I don't remember exactly what what they want in that field, but it's one particular thing that they want in that field. First field, first segment.
Was it the Standard Bank? Was it the Standard Bank SSVS format, Masleen? I think it would be. Hey, that's the most commonly used one.
Yes, that's the free format. That one. Yes.
Okay, let's
on that one.
This one then. Okay, I don't want to do it for this bank. It's just I don't want to mess up. Oh, well, we possibly can. It doesn't really matter. Let's go Standard Bank SSVS free format, and then we'll look at that actual format and just see what they expect in that field. Okay. Oh, it didn't save it for me. Just give me a sec. Yeah. So it was the SSVS 3, wasn't it? No, didn't get the name right there. Okay, so let's just see what required fields we need to put in here. Batch description. It might actually be that one you're talking about. See, there's a batch description. Yeah. Can you see that? The batch description. And that is also. You see, and that batch description is obviously one of the fields that needs in the export file.
Yeah, yeah, and the sub batch number as well,
which is there.
Yeah.
Now you see that's not part of that segment description, because that segment description is basically what's going to appear on the statement of your bank statement and of course on the beneficiary's bank statement. So when we look at this, that is obviously a set description that has to be in that file, and that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, and it has to be a specific amount of characters, otherwise the file doesn't import.
Correct. And now if we can look at this, yeah, and why don't I go back to FNB? I thought I saved standard.
See, also the segments for Standard Bank free format it's standard. It's set to one segment as standard. If I remember correctly, if you add an additional segment, it doesn't accept that bank file.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so here we go. This is the one you're talking about, because look here. You see in the header of the export file, for each record, it's got that bank description. And then description, bank it shows you that for that particular bank description that's required, and that's the one you're talking about that has to match, you set that up in EFT bank setup batch description, which is that field we just spoke about here. There, you see, batch description.
So can you get in the setup, or is that set by the bank itself?
What, this batch description? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you change the amount of characters in your setup field?
No.
Or is that determined by the bank?
That is determined by the bank. The offsets are always determined by the bank, because it would have to read each field when it uploads to the bank, and it has to understand the field length of each field.
So you can't edit anything in this screen.
And this screen, no. This screen
is basically.
This is a purely informative screen.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so it's basically just telling you that for this particular format, that description that you guys are referring to is 30 characters.
Has to match that.
Correct. And that it also tells you, see, this is why this is so important, this new feature where you can zoom in on the bank record layout, because now you can see in the header of your record, there's going to be 2 characters, which is our own description. Then the next 8 characters is a batch create date. Then the next 30 characters is that description we're referring to. So you can actually go and look at the record in the EFT file once it's generated, and you can start counting from offset 11 until offset 41, and that will be this batch description.
Okay, and you can't have the screen open while you're doing the EFT setup, right?
Well, you could print it or export it.
Okay.
Or you could do this. Let's do that. You see, you could just move it
Oh,
there.
you can have it next to the other screen.
You can have it next to the other screen.
Oh, I see. Perfect.
Yeah,
okay, so it doesn't completely disappear when you start actually with the setup.
Yeah, and then you can just...
Okay, that's good.
And that answers your question on that SSVS3 format. You see, it's different for each format. And that is why it's important to use that zoom button, because only then are you going to know exactly what that format requires.
So the segments in the description for both yourself and the beneficiary does not affect the import file.
It only imports the import file as far as what goes into the description field of the import file. It does not affect the length of that field. So if you've set a segment, 3 segments, and the values in those 3 segments are longer than the description field allows for the bank, it's only going to fill what the description field allows.
Okay, so it will basically cut it off, but it wouldn't prevent the file from importing.
It will just truncate it. That descriptions you build has to go into the particular description field for that particular offset in that particular bank format for that particular field length.
Be visible on the EFT file.
Correct.
Okay.
And then, of course, all you do is you then post your EFT batch in your Cashbook batch list, and once you've posted your EFT batch, it will then generate that EFT file for you. Okay, so that's all you do. So let's post this batch. Hope we've got a valid EFT entry in there. Okay, there we go. One EFT batch was created for posting sequence 7. Now, the last feature I want to show you is as well that if you have a posted EFT batch, because you might have generated the batch and now you might have realized that there is an issue because one of your beneficiaries in that batch has changed their beneficiary payment details and they've notified you, but you as the person that has right to process the EFT batch have not notified the person that's got authorization to set up the beneficiary details to change that beneficiary details. And you want that beneficiary details to be now changed for that EFT file, but now your Cashbook batch is already posted and your EFT file already generated. Then, if you scroll in your batch list onto a posted EFT batch, as we are doing now, then you will see this generate button here will become enabled. And you can then hit the generate button and it will say, are you sure you want to generate an EFT file for batch 7? And if you say yes, it will then prompt you. Do you want to update the batch with the latest EFT miscellaneous code details? So if you select yes, it will then generate that EFT file with the new information sitting in the miscellaneous code EFT tab. If you select no, it will generate that EFT file with the batch information that's already in that posted batch. Now let me explain how that works, because it sounds like it magically just takes the information from EFT and then how does it get it into the batch. There is a particular batch table. Now we've got the batch header table, obviously, the batch detail table and the batch sub-detail table. Those are our 3 batch tables. But there's also a batch miscellaneous table called CBBTMS. And that is where the EFT beneficiary payment information is retrieved to from that miscellaneous code EFT tab to use to generate that EFT file. Now if you say no, it's not going to re-update that CBBTMS table. It will use the information that was entered for that beneficiary payment information when the batch was posted initially. If you say yes, however, it will then go through a process and it will re-retrieve all the EFT miscellaneous payment information from that miscellaneous code, the EFT tab, and it will repopulate the CBBTMS table. So that if you say yes, it will then generate the EFT file with the latest information.
Mike, sorry, will that screen, will that message prompt even though there's no changes to miscellaneous codes?
Yes, by default. It doesn't know. It doesn't go and check at that point.
All right.
Okay, it doesn't cross-check.
If nothing has changed, whether you select yes or no, there's no difference.
100% correct. It will just remain the same.
Okay, cool.
Okay. And that concludes the EFT training. So if there's any questions, but I can tell you guys are boxed now. You've asked all the right questions.
Did we? Mike, for the first be with us. We've got you on speed now, so.
Now, can I send my beneficiary payment information to you guys so you can make some payments to me?
You know what, if we don't get paid, you know we stuffed it up, so you're welcome to. Having a payment within the next month, you know, to reschedule training.
Okay, I'll do that.
Anyway.
Well, guys, you are now all trained up on Cashbook, on RecXpress, and EFTXpress. So well done.
That was an eye-opener.
The forum does really help. So that's good.
Yeah, it's a great knowledge base with that search facility there. Yes.
I nearly mailed you last night because there was something on the forum we tried. Well, we just looked at it briefly and we're like, okay, how do we do that? So luckily we had it sorted out before, because I was about to send you a screenshot and say, we looked at it, it is in the forum, but we don't understand how to fix it. But it worked.
Can't follow instructions.
Now, you see, that's why we don't do support via direct email, because first of all,
definitely.
That search facility lightens my workload, because as you rightfully say, you can find a lot of the answers there without even contacting us or posting a new message on the forum.
Definitely.
And of course it helps you guys, because when I'm sleeping at night and you're in a different time zone, for instance, or you're working late, then you can find the answers without me being there. So
We love it on the forum, and you know it's very helpful. So,
but if there's anything,
I eventually, got comfortable by using the forum. Remember when previously there was like 100 mails going up and down. So now it really does make sense.
Well, if there's anything that comes up that you can't find there, or that you're running into that you don't understand, please post a message there. And I monitor it unless I'm in training and our office hours, because we are in the same time zone, then you'll get a prompt response there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Excellent. Cool.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Have a good evening. Enjoy your weekend.
You too, guys. Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.
You too, Mr.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.